going to introduce us to a lot of history based on the locations of post offices. It promises to be very interesting, and we look forward to it, Dr. Pushkar Sohoni. Welcome here. Before we begin, I would draw everybody's attention to the loss that the nation has had, and state mourning has been declared for 2 days, including a closed holiday today. So, in the memory of Bharat Ratna Lata Mangeshkar, who passed away yesterday, I request all to maintain 1 minute of silence. Okay. Uh, Before we begin the main meeting today, we will do a little Rotary business. The birthdays and wedding anniversaries. On the 10th of February, we celebrate the birthday of Rotary and Alka Mitra. Alka and Rohit are not online with us today. Uh, we wish you a very happy birthday in advance, Alka, and we wish you good health and you have a great year ahead. On the 11th of February, we celebrate the birthday of Rotarian past President Gurdeep Singh Arora. Happy birthday in advance, Gurdeep. And we do remember the great contribution you made with your endowment of $25,000 for the Rotary Foundation. Thank you very much, Gurdeep, and we wish you a great, happy year ahead. On the 13th of February, we have two celebrations. One is the birthday of Rotarian Bhaskar Motadu. Happy birthday, Bhaskar, in advance. And we wish we can meet you up and have a drink together. Uh, Wish you a very happy birthday and a great year ahead. Wedding anniversaries. On the 13th of February, we also have the wedding anniversary of past President Atul Shah and Rotary and Anju Shah. Congratulations, Atul and Anju. We wish you many happy more years together, and we wish you a safe and happy, healthy life ahead.
Thank you, Bharat. I already paid 1,500 initially, and rest I have
Yes,
paid
you've given.
$100,
Thank you
and
very
still
much.
I'm giving within next month.
Great. So we're getting a lot of money coming in from Atul. Thank you very much, Atul, and the Rotary Foundation is grateful to you. A few announcements. Narinder Bakshi will announce about a medical camp. Over to you, Narinder.
President Bharat members and guests. We had a successful blood donation, I'm saying medical checkup camp yesterday at in the city, Guruvarpet, and this was in association with the Pune Municipal Corporation, Guru Nanak Medical Foundation, and ASGI Hospital, where they had fever. They ran a fever clinic, opthal clinic, and then cataract detection. And along with that, we had distributed the spectacles to the needy. along with all this, the Guru Nanak Medical Foundation had sponsored and agreed to do vaccination camp also there. Best part of this event was the PI. All over the town and the Ganjpet area and Bhuvaneshpet area, there were huge banners put up with the Rotary Club of Puna's name on it. And people are during that camp who all visited also appreciated the contribution made by Rotary Club of Pune. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Narinder. You're doing wonderful work, and thank you for ensuring that RC Pune gets wide coverage, because the work we do, yes, we will continue doing the work, but when more people know about it, we'll get more donors to our cause. Thank you very much.
Just now I got a message of Kate that in media coverage also it's been there. In print media it has come in few newspapers. I'll share that.
Oh, lovely. We will circulate that to everyone. Thank you, Narinder. Secretary Maithili, for your announcements, please.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
President Colonel Bharat Tharadi, my fellow Rotarians, aunts, spouses, and guests, a very warm good evening to all of you. Last Monday, we had a lovely meeting. We were 7 of us who went to old age home Abhar Maya, which is run by Dr. Aparna Deshmukh. So we have felicitated her with Vocational Service Award. It was a lovely meeting, and it was a hybrid meeting. So many of you did join online, and the attendance at that meeting was Rotarians 30, aunts 11, spouse 1, and total of 42. This is in addition to the 25 senior citizens or Aji Azoba that we call them, who were present for the program. Our next week, which is 14th February, we have our official DG visit. So we have already circulated the agenda for the meeting. The venue is boat club and the dress code is formal. So looking forward to seeing most of you there. There are no district announcements. All meetings in district will go on as usual. And that's the end of my announcement. Thank you. Over to you, Bharat.
Thank you, Maithili. So as far as the DG visit is concerned, we have registrations. We still have space for about 6 more registrations. So please go ahead and register. The only reason we need to put such restrictions is because of the total number that cannot be exceeded, keeping COVID norms in view, at the boat club venue, where the total number given to us is 90. It's an open air venue, so there's less problems of transmission because of we are not in a closed hall. But even then, the number that is specified by the club is 90. So we look forward to a good meeting with the DG. And for the information of all, the pre-meeting, that is what is called the Apex meeting by the DG, will be started at 5:30 p.m. at the same location, Port Club, in another room, where the DG will be meeting with members of the board as well as rotaractors and interactors. And we will have interaction from 5:30 to 6:30, after which we'll come over to the swimming pool poolside location for the fellowship, and then the meeting at 7. So look forward to seeing you all there. In brief, also was the fact that last week we had a great trip to the global grant sites. I will not talk about it much here because a lot of details have been given in the bulletin. But suffice to say that it was a very rewarding visit, especially when we saw the progress made at Ramwadi, a project which we had given up 3 years ago as not being very successful, and we were proved wrong. And we went there and we found that it is very successful. And where they were barely taking out one crop in a year, they are now cultivating sugarcane. So that's a great progress in life for them, and it makes a visible difference to their lifestyle. I now request past President Sanjay Kher to introduce our speaker this evening. Over to you, Sanjay.
President Colonel Bharat, Rotarians, Rotarians and guests. Our program committee chair, Rotarian Zari, had spelled out in the beginning of this year a plan to showcase development of Pune from its humble beginnings to what it is today by inviting a galaxy of speakers. Rotarian Zarir presented before the audience some speakers who highlighted facets of history and cultural developments in this city. Today, we are fortunate to have another gem in this city, an intellectual giant whose introduction presents a real challenge to me. His achievements run into 21 pages. If if 1 minute is devoted to one page, my introduction will defy the 5-minute barrier placed by the club upon me. The formidable bulletin editor then, Major General Amar Krishna, would print my name in bold black and underline it with a broader red line to blacklist me. Now, this combination of red and black does not always a Johnny Walker make, and therefore I may be banished from evening fellowships. To continue, Dr. Pushkar Sohoni, our esteemed speaker, completed Bachelor of Architecture from Pune University in 1999, MS in Historic Preservation, and PhD from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, University of Pennsylvania, in History of Art. He worked as postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Asian Studies in University of British Columbia in Vancouver before returning to his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania. He worked here for 5 years as lecturer in South Asian Studies and was also a librarian in the Asian Library. He returned to Pune to join the prestigious Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research at Pashan, Pune, 2016. He presently chairs the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. At IISER, he has been teaching archaeological science, history of science and technology, history of art and architecture, numismatics, and morphology. In the Slovak Republic in Bratislava, he lectured in the principles of religious architecture in South Asia and the social context of it. He is regarded as an authority in history of architecture in India. He has written a unique book on the ancestry of the great Shivaji Maharaj. The book is called The Great Inscription at Tanjavur. He has written a book by the name Taming the Oriental Bazaar. He's also written a book on Jewish heritage of the Deccan. And surprisingly, very well known, very less known, Sultanate of Ahmedabad. Please remember, it has nothing to do with the Sultans of Ahmedabad, the present DO. He has written hundreds of articles for journals in Marathi and English on diverse subjects such as social science and humanities, data science and artificial intelligence, water research and the future of water, morphology, numismatics. Today he'll speak on tracking history of colonial Pune through post office locations, a topic so novel and interesting that it merits your undivided attention. Rotarians, Rotarians and guests, brace up to listen and imbibe every word from Dr. Pushkar Sohoni. Dr. Sohoni, sir, I request you to take over the mic and captivate this august audience. I present Dr. Pushkar Sohoni.
Thank you for that very generous introduction. In fact, I think it overstates who I am and what I do, but I'm an architectural historian. And luckily, the Sultanate I wrote about was the Sultanate of Ahmednagar and not Ahmedabad. So even further from the duo. In any case, today's talk is about looking at the history of Pune in the colonial period, which is to say from about 1820 till 1947, by tracking one set of data points that we have, and that is the growth of the postal service. And how we know about the postal service is through various post offices that they set up. The first one, of course, being the GPO. Not that there were no post offices before that, but the modern Indian postal system, as we know, really has post offices that begin with post office number 1, going all the way to post office number, I don't know how many Pune has now. I think it might be in the 50s or 60s. In any case, there is a very direct relationship between colonial rule and the modern postal system. And let me start sharing my screen and let's get started with that. I might switch my face off at some point because I don't think it necessarily adds to what I'm going to talk about. So the modern postal system exists till date, and we know it, and it starts off under the British through a set of legislations in the 19th century. And postmasters were very powerful people. One has to realize that the postal system was an important technology. I mean, in the United States, under colonial rule, nobody less than Ben Franklin becomes Postmaster General. In any case, we'll use the growth of the postal system in Pune as a set of data points on which to map the growth of the colonial city. Now, of course, it was Warren Hastings who, under the East India Company, started a postal service in 1766. It was called Company Mail, but it was not for everybody. And it's in 1854 that the whole system is really modified by Lord Dalhousie, who introduced a Uniform Postage Rates Act, which meant anybody, as long as they paid postage, could use this kind of postage system. But what we are going to look at is something called the PIN, the Postal Index number, 4110, whatever it is, for wherever you are in Pune, which was introduced by somebody called Sriram Bhikaji Velankar, who had served as an additional secretary in the Union Ministry for Communication. And he designed and implemented this in 1972 on Independence Day, with the objective of simplifying and sorting of mail, speeding up mail transmission and delivery. And the reason that had to be done, but I'll quickly tell you what the PIN code, the postal index number, really is. The first digit is the postal zone, and there are 9 postal zones in India. And then the second digit is the subzone or sub-region. The third digit is the sorting district. The fourth one is the service route. And the last 2 digits are the only ones which actually give you the post office within the sorting, within a service route. And it is these last 2 numbers that define for us the growth of the postal service in any city. So 01 will always be the first post office in any city, and the higher the numbers go, the later they come. Now, all this was done in 1972 because in India, to begin with, the first problem was you had to deal with a variety of languages and scripts. So when people wrote letters and addressed them in different languages, it was a nightmare for the sorting office. And then we also had lots of places with the same names. So for example, the 2 Hyderabad's, one in Sindh and one in the Deccan, always had to be suffixed with Hyderabad Dakhan or Hyderabad Sindh. Otherwise, your letter could end up in the wrong place. In fact, at the beginning of the lockdown in 2020, there was this curious case some of you might have read about an old lady from Aurangabad in Maharashtra who mistakenly got on a bus and ended up in Aurangabad in Bihar. And that's because she asked people where the bus was going and they said Aurangabad. And she thought it was her Aurangabad and it happened to be one really far away. So this is a real problem in a country like India. And the postal index number, the PIN code, really was invented to deal with all these problems. Different languages, many cities and places of the same name. In the city of Pune, before the PIN code is introduced, we have a succession of post offices. Post office number 1 that was established in Poona was the GPO, next to the commissioner's office, which all of you know. The second post office was the Budhvar one called City Post. And that was because you only had two post offices early on, one to serve the cantonment and the colonial establishment, which was number one, and the rest to serve the native city, which was number two. And of course, there was another cantonment on the other side of the river in Khadki, and that was post office number three. And the rest, 4, 5, 6, really come later as the city has to accommodate a number of residential needs and also administrative needs. And we'll look at all of them. So the pin codes of areas in Pune, of post offices in Pune, really from 1 to 8 for sure mirror a certain kind of colonial growth. And we'll look at what happens in Pune from 1819 onwards, from the Third Anglo-Maratha War. Now, one has to realize that the first British establishment in Pune was actually at the Sangam, where the two rivers, the Mula and the Mutha, meet. Today, there is a judge's house there, but that used to be the place where the resident at the Peshwa court used to live. And the blue dot marks the place on the Sangam. Notice it's on the other bank of the river, away from the native city, and that was to afford a certain amount of safety. There was already a small garrison at Khadki, and therefore the resident under duress could escape there. Today, if you look at a Google image of what the Sangam looks like, it's crisscrossed by all kinds of highways and bridges. The poor engineering college has been completely sliced in multiple ways by railway tracks, by highways, by roads, by every form of what we call development. In any case, right at the tip of the Sangam over here used to be the residence bungalow called the Sangam. And I mean, what you see on the right is a later building that was built there because the original building was burnt in the war of the Third Anglo-Maratha War. Now, the whole story really begins, let's say, with the Poona Darbar, where a painter called James Wales painted this. This painting was left incomplete. It was finished by the Daniels in England later in 1805. But the painting is of the British resident signing a treaty with the Peshwa to make common cause against Tipu Sultan. And James Wales, the painter who painted this, lived close by at the Sangam. He visited the Shanivar Wada and rather fancifully painted that. But along with a number of other artists who were at the Sangam at the residency, they made paintings of the city of Pune and its life and customs, observing people around. In fact, there's a fantastic book written a couple of years ago by Uday Kulkarni about James Wales. So see if you can still get it. In any case, what you see on the left is a painting of a scene of Sati that is taking place at the Sangam. And almost every visitor to the Sangam, either graphically or through words, describes this kind of scene where people come down in hordes and widows are burnt alive. In any case, the British residency was at the Sangam, and a very important gentleman by the name of Mount Stuart Elphinstone was the resident there during the Third Anglo-Maratha War. He came to Pune in 1811, and politics then was very complicated, and there was a tenuous peace which eventually was broken with the Marathas in 1817, and the Marathas declared war on the British. Elphinstone assumed command of the military during this crisis, and it was in November 1817 that all kinds of developments took place very fast, and the English moved troops from their base. They had a very big cantonment in Shirur between Pune and Ahmednagar, and they also moved a lot of troops towards Khadki and Dapodi. And the Peshwa asked Elphinstone to send them away, and the resident refused. And a large number of Maratha soldiers started pouring into the city from various sides, and the bombardment of the residency began from where the RTO office is located today. This is Elphinstone. The residency at the Sangam where he lived was burnt down, and he had to flee to Dapodi, to Colonel Burr. Colonel Burr was somebody who lived in a house built by one Major Ford. And I'll tell you more about Ford. So Ford used to command what was called the subsidiary force of the Peshwa, which was a force that the Peshwa paid of English troops that were maintained. And Colonel Ford was therefore at the Peshwa court and friends with a Sardar called Moropant Dikshit. And they ended up fighting on opposite sides, but they had pledged to each other that if one of them died, the other one would take care of their family. In any case, Elphinstone runs away from the residency, but running away might be wrong because he did so very coolly, took command of the army and fought at the Battle of Khadki on the same day, which was the 5th of November. And so from the Sangam, which you see marked by the first blue dot, all the way to Dapori is where he went. And then with his troops, he came to Khadki again. And what was at Dapori? There was a house that was built by Major Ford, which after the Anglo-Maratha Wars, after the British take over the whole area, John Malcolm, the governor, actually purchases. And so here, Elphinstone leaves from the Sangam to go to Dapori. The same day, the Battle of Khadki is fought. 10 days later, the Battle of Yaroda is fought, and then the British will take over the whole city. Now enter John Malcolm, the gentleman you see in the picture. He came to India in 1817 and was acting as the Governor General's agents in the negotiations leading to the Anglo-Maratha War. And he was appointed Governor of Bombay in 1827. He bought that house, which you see on this peninsula in Dapodi. It still stands today. It's a Government of Maharashtra workshop for making dam gates. He bought this house for £1,000 to use as the government house. And believe me, what you have there is still that bungalow. And it was used as the governor's residence till 1865, when the residence was moved to a building we now know as the main building of the University of Pune. And both John Malcolm and Elphinstone were known as people who promoted the education of Indians and so on. In any case, there are all kinds of plaques there. You need permission, but you can still go there. And this is what the governor of Bombay's house looked like at that time. The crossings around the area are called Panch Bangla and Bara Bangla, suggestive of an early settlement of bungalows. This particular house is called the Manor House. And the colonial government of the Bombay presidency operated from here in the monsoons. And there are other buildings around the grounds for work, including a teaching museum and so on. The interiors are also surprisingly well maintained because they do house offices of this government, of the state government, department of the state government. Besides the large main bungalow, there is a smaller bungalow, an office bungalow, a set of quarters for aides-de-camp and officers of the bodyguard, and for the garden superintendent. And you have all kinds of ancillary buildings in those grounds, all dating from the 1820s. There are cattle stables, warehouses, and all kinds of other buildings which also have been repurposed through 100 years. This warehouse used to house something called the Deccan Breweries, which was the next owner of this property before it came over to the government. Even today, if you look at the tiles, you'll see they are all imported from France. And the most notable artifact that comes from this government house at Dapodi is what are called the Dapori Drawings. Again, a very good book written about it by Henry Nolte. The Dapodi Gardens were made famous by this set of botanical drawings made between 1847 and 1850. And they're all these drawings are at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh. And again, I mean, you can talk for hours about this, but the important person here was somebody called Dr. Alexander Gibson, who was superintendent of the Botanic Gardens of the Bombay Presidency. And he built several of these gardens, including one at Hivre near Junnar. And, he studied a lot of medicinal plants, and the gardens here had almost 2,000 plant species, including 13 that Gibson's himself has, discovered and are named after him. In any case, the gardens don't survive, only the drawings do. Khadki was an important place because the governor had started camping there through the monsoons, and the cantonment close by in its very early years was rather rudimentary, as you can see. The ordnance road, even I have a couple of pictures of the bazaar, which are also very basic, nothing like what Khadki is today. And what happened to, the Battle of Khadki was fought where Khadki Bazaar is, and the Battle of Yarauda was fought on the exact site where Deccan College stands today. At this time, there are barracks being built for soldiers in Khadki, in Vanaudi, in a number of places, and these are based on a sanitation commission that the colonial government has commissioned, because after the mutiny of 1857, there are strange things that happen. You can't have large numbers of native soldiers. You have to keep rotating regiments of European soldiers all the time. And when European soldiers come, 1 out of 3 doesn't go back. He dies because of tropical disease. And so this medical commission suggests a whole slew of measures. That there is no germ theory at that point. What people believe in is miasmas, so bad vapors and airs. And so these new barracks, which you can still see around AFMC, you can see close to All Saints School in Khadki, these barracks were built specifically for the hygiene and good health, good ventilation of soldiers. There were calculations about how much volume of air is required for each soldier, and these rooms were built large, airy, and tall. And if you look at them in plan, they're all laid out in a way in echelon formation, so that when wind passes through one of the barracks, it doesn't immediately pass through the next one. Air or bad miasmas from one barrack don't pass on to the other. And of course, for the governor, close by was built a big garrison church, then called Christ Church, now called All Saints. A fantastic church. Again, we can talk a lot about it. It's very unusual in its planning. It's not symmetrical. Things have been added later, but I don't have a picture of it. If you ever visit this church, go to the pews right in front, because all of them have signage that suggests that they were specifically meant for the governor of Bombay, the commanding officer, military officer there, and so on. And the pews actually, unusually, in a way you won't find anywhere in the world, have slots in which bodyguards of the governor can keep their rifles. So bringing your guns into a church and actually making arrangements that as you pray, your guns are kept slotted into the pews is something you really don't see in any other churches. And that is all happening on this side of the city. So the big circle in the middle here is where the Khadki cantonment gets set up. What you have as a solid blue dot on top is where the Dapodi governor's house is. And in 1865, Sir Bartle Frere, governor of Bombay, decides that that house is too small, not befitting his stature. And he decides to build a massive government house in a massive estate on the southern edge of Khadki cantonment in a place we now know as the University of Poona right here. And he does this because not only is Khadki cantonment close by, there is another big army garrison in Pashan. So the defense estates in Pashan, ARDE, the DRDO establishment is not an accident. There was always a very big defense establishment in Pashan, a big garrison. And so, the residency, the really tiny dot at the bottom, is where the story begins, where the British resident lives. When they become governors of Bombay, ruling over the whole region, they make a government house in Dapori. And as their rule becomes prosperous, particularly through the cotton trading of the 1860s in Bombay, they decide to build a massive government house over here, closer to the city, closer to the cantonment. and it will be between two garrisons. And there are old postcards I have of the camp at Pashan. So where you have Loyola High School, NCL, the rural police headquarters is where you had a massive tent city of soldiers permanently encamped. And the water source for the soldiers and for the new government house was a newly built lake, Pashan Lake, an artificial lake built by a dam on Ram Nadi. And so here you have Sir Bartle Frere, and on the right-hand side, you have the government house that he built to live in and also to entertain visitors. And naturally, from the old residency to the new government house, that whole corridor becomes very important. It's exactly this corridor where Rand, the plague commissioner of Poona, is assassinated by the Trafficker brothers. In fact, about 30 years ago, I remember right next to the present Ganeshkind Road used to be this narrow alley of trees creating a holloway. And this was the governor's riding path. In fact, Pune University, before the character of it has been changed by compound walls inside, really used to have roads that looked like this. Again, nobody usually sees Pune University from the other side, from the kitchen side. And what we are missing now are massive awnings and all kinds of soft furnishings, vegetation that are completely absent. Now, this is all a kind of prequel to what we are talking about, is how Pune grows. So Pune grows with the residency, and then, as the residency is burnt down, the whole colonial establishment moves to Khadki. What's happening on the city side is they set up a small cantonment called the Garpir Cantonment, which is named after Hazrat Garpir, one of the early Muslim saints in Pune, who is buried right next to the present collector's office. And you can visit his dargah too. And behind that were a number of colonial buildings. So an important church, St. Paul's, gets built there on Church Street. And of course, the GPO comes up right there. But very soon, that area becomes inadequate for housing a cantonment, and they merge the Vanavdi and the Khorpadi lines and create an enormous cantonment. And Garpir becomes the civil lines. And so the GPO is there, and that's post office number 1. This is the first, colonial postal establishment in Pune, which has permanent headquarters. But around it, a number of other philanthropic endeavors, Sassoon Hospitals, sponsored by Sir David Sassoon, along with the big synagogue, again, European wards at the Sassoon Hospital, St. Paul's Church, which we just talked about a minute ago, across from the commissioner's office, and also these buildings, which will come up later, called the central buildings, which are a kind of secretariat that will house all kinds of government functions. In fact, that whole big island with central buildings, around St. Helena's School has a number of fantastic colonial government buildings. And again, take a good look when you go around next time. And of course, the area will go now completely unrecognizable, but the Pune archives, the Peshwa Daftar, gets built around the area, and so does Council Hall. Now, in the cantonment, we'll go back to the map in a minute. Around the edges of the cantonment are interface areas with the native city. And these are called bazaars. The chief of them is something called the Sadar Bazaar, which is the strip that separates the cantonment from the native city. And we'll look at it in a minute. And this Sadar Bazaar has what we know as Center Street, Main Street, East Street. The other bazaar is Solapur Bazaar. There were 3 or 4 bazaars, and they were segregated along the lines of, class, nationality, religion. And so all of them had a slightly different character. Again, virtually unrecognizable pictures of Main Street. You might recognize an odd building or two you might have seen at some point. And the church on this side of town, the main Anglican church for the cantonment, was St. Mary's. built very early, consecrated by Bishop Heber, who comes all the way for it. It gets those porches later, but more or less stands exactly the same since 1825. Of course, what's built next to it, St. Patrick's, is for all the Irish soldiers who are coming in after 1857. In any case, you already have army lines in Ghorpadi and Vanaudi. And so the new cantonment seamlessly covers all of them. And so what you have is you have the residency, which is now forgotten. In the 1860s, they start making it an institutional area. So you have, Jamshedji's bungalow there, the one of which only the tower survives on the old Bombay-Pune highway. You have the College of Science, which is now known as the College of Engineering Poona, built in the 1860s, designed by the same person who designs Government House or the University of Poona, James Trubshaw. Later on, a number of other institutions will also come up in that area. The first cantonment, the Garpir cantonment, becomes the civil lines, and a much larger cantonment is drawn up with the race course at its center. And towards the native city, which is the dense part you see in the middle of the screen, densely populated, you have the Sadar Bazaar, which is all the narrow streets populated by a number of trading families who have shops there, shops at the bottom, and they live on top. And of course, if you've read Farooq Dhondi's Poona Company, you'll know Sharbatwala Chowk is one of the many places which really draws a dividing line. People from the city don't move into cantonment beyond that, and people from the cantonment do not go on that side. So the College of Science, the College of Engineering Poona now gets built in this institutional corridor. And so does later an offshoot of the College of Science, something called Agriculture College now, Mahatma Phule College of Agriculture, which was built as a College of Agriculture, but as soon as it was built, the First World War broke out, and it was used as a war hospital for 5 years. This is very interesting because you had all these Australian and New Zealand nurses with the Anzac Corps who came in and served here. And they always had a dilemma of whether to go to the governor's house for a ball, that is the University of Pune, or whether to go to the cantonment, because they were right in between. And so in a nutshell, what you see is where Pune gets set up first, which is around Dapodi, really has no importance after the 1860s when the Postal Act comes in. And so while the pattern of city or colonial city growth or the colonial establishment in Pune really starts with Dapodi Kharki and then moves to where Poona cantonment is now. By the time the postal service is introduced, Poona cantonment is the premier cantonment. And Kharki cantonment really is acting as a garrison for the governor when he comes to live in Governor House. And so Poona cantonment is post office number 1. That's the nerve center for communications. And the native population also deserves to have a postal service, and they get post office number 2, city post. Kharki, which is important, gets post office number 3. Then a new suburb with a number of educational institutions is set up on the other side of the river, which becomes Poona 4, a post office that has a beautiful little building. The roof has just been replaced last week. And the old institutional corridor by the Sangam becomes Poona 5. Now, suddenly in the 1870s and 80s, a number of institutions show up in Poona, a prison, a mental asylum, and also a big garrison. And they are all given their own communication center because they are on a peninsula with rivers on both sides. And the bridges are quite far away. Holkar Bridge on the west and Fitzgerald Bridge on the right, the old Yeroda Bridge with the lions. And so Poona 6 gets its own post office. And Poona 7, which is the governor's residence, has to have a communication system of its own because for a number of months, the whole Bombay administration moves here. And so they become Poona 7. And the garrison that supports them, the defense estate today, becomes Poona 8. And so while the sequence of British settlement in Poona is different from what you see in terms of these numbers, what this represents is from the 1870s onwards, the kind of importance that is accorded to different areas because of the new institutions that are coming now. And I think I'll end the PowerPoint and turn on my video here. I don't want to take up a lot of time so that we have enough time for questions, and very happy to. And I have a whole set of postcards, about 300 of them, which have been scanned by Sahapedia, and hopefully they'll be up online for everybody to see. But so we are looking at two different strands. One is the strand that takes you through how the British acquire and settle parts of the city for themselves to live in. And the other is the sequence in which post offices come up. And both of them don't neatly map onto each other, but they do run in parallel ways. So thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear that last part. What did you say?
Oh, no, I said, I mean, these are two histories that run parallel. They don't neatly map onto each other. The post offices follow slightly different sequence, but you know, the and British occupation of the city, of various parts of the city, takes on a slightly different sequence, but it's more or less parallel. It's just that Khadki, which really should have been post office number 1, loses out and becomes number 3. And the big cantonment that is done by merging 3 cantonments, parts of Garpir cantonment, the Vanavdi lines, and the Ghorpadi lines.
Ghorpadi.
That big cantonment becomes very important to be served by the post office in Garpir by the new civil lines. So.
Thank you. Will you be taking questions now?
Yes, absolutely.
So the forum is open for questions. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions, please.
Tarun, you're muted if you're asking.
You're muted, Tarun. We can't hear you.
Unmute. Okay, great. So Pushkar, wonderful. I'm an architect as well, and I do have a side interest with historic preservation and at an urban level, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And fantastic. This is one of the few lectures I've seen that covers the history with pictures and the evolution of these monuments, their current state. Now, I travel to Bombay often because I do miss Bombay and South Mumbai and all the architecture, Indo-Saracenic architecture there. But, you know, sadly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Pune, so often you're driving on these new flyovers and you notice these old buildings peeping up between the trees. Sadly, I feel that there's not enough awareness. Citizens groups like INTAC and UDRI in Bombay have glorified, like Horniman Circle it looks glorious. It's even lit up and it's something that citizens can feel proud about. However, Pune is such an intellectual hub. Somehow these buildings have been lost in time, you know, except for a few of them. And I've taken screenshots, if you don't mind. I'm just admitting to that.
Absolutely. In fact,
because
if you need high resolution images, I'm happy to send them. So.
I'm just enamored by the wealth of architecture that we have, but sadly, it's not very well shown to the public or depicted in the history about it, even lit up as monuments, you know. So that's just an observation I'm making. Hopefully it will change as people get more aware of what we have and what we mustn't lose, you know, because Pune is a burgeoning city with developers all cropping all over the place, but that's not that's just the boring urban fabric. But what we need to look at is these older monuments, like you said, landmarks that have so much history behind them that are lost in time, decaying with banyan tree roots and things like that.
I agree, and somehow Pune has missed out on a number of kinds of institutions. For example, there is no major art gallery in Pune.
Yes.
There is no major museum in Pune. I mean, we have the Raja Kelkar, but at the end of the day, it is a single person's, an ordinary person's collection, and there's only so far he can go.
Yes.
There seems to be no concerted preservation group, no architects group like UDRI, and it's. I mean, again, I don't know what needs to be done, but
yes. The question is why. Why not? Yes.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask? Yeah, Tinky, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself.
Good evening, Mr. Pushkar. It
Hello.
was really lovely hearing you. It took us back to our childhood and the romance of post offices, which is extinct now. We'd all go over and wait for certain letters we could pick up from post offices and things like that. But at the same time, the buildings were so beautiful that they connected you to all the history, whether it was British history or Indian or whatever. There was some kind of a link we had. Isn't there any preservation body, a kind of government body that preserves all these post offices by themselves, or do they come under all historical monuments only?
No, it's the Postal Service which really has to. I mean, there are efforts made, but again, the tendering is problematic. You go with the lowest costs. There are all kinds of procedures which really hamper good preservation activity a number of times.
Yes.
There was a set of stamps released by the Postal Service on historic post offices. None of Pune's post offices feature in there, but it's a nice sheet. So do take a look at it. You'll find it online as well. So there is some celebration of postal architecture, but not much on the ground. But I think, these are all small moves by which people start appreciating. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yes.
And like a lot of services, I think their functions have very quickly outgrown the physical facility they have. And so it's always firefighting. They have to build things, add things, put on things that really destroy the integrity of the older buildings.
Yes. So is there any place where old stamps can be given and, preserved? There are lots of people who have stamps and we don't know what to do with it. So is there any place where we can give stamps? No good enough museums or places where stamps can be given.
No,
that's a pity because they would be lost.
I mean, I have 4,000 or 5,000 stamps.
Okay. Maybe we
Yes,
can
Sam.
all give them to you. Thank you.
Yes, Sam, please.
Dr. Sohoni, the GPO has what is called Poona's zero mileage.
Yes.
How come we came with zero mileage here at GPO when that was the last tip of GPO that came actually?
The zero stone is set up to measure distances between cities. I mean, that's considered the center of a city. And who needs it the most is actually the Postal Service. And so you are measuring, when you say from Poona to Bombay is so many kilometers, it's from zero stone GPO Poona to zero stone GPO Bombay.
Okay. But why did they pick on GPO Poona, this particular area? Because actually, if the history tells us to see things grew up much later at the cantonment area.
No, but this was supposed to be the old cantonment, which is why St. Paul's was built here. A number of buildings were built here, and it proved to be small, so they shifted to the much more open areas to the east and combined cantonments, the Dapori lines, Vanavadi lines, and the Garpir lines, and everything in between was designated the cantonment. And the only thing they had to kind of contest was Ghashiram Kotwal's old Vada, which is close to, Burger King, close to Poolgate.
Right. And thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised, so I would request Rotarian Jayashree Kuber to propose a vote of thanks, please.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Jayashree.
President, yes, President Colonel Bharat Haladi, all the Rotarians, all the Rotarians, and our esteemed chief guest today. I was really thrilled to read his biodata, 21-page biodata. I was so shocked to read all the things. I said, we have never gone in this field, and I'm really thankful and I congratulate Zarir for taking this subject and really enlightening us in this respect. Because I tell you frankly, I confess, I would not have gone in this details anytime. But after listening to Pushkar Sohoni's lecture, I'm really interested in that. I would love to read all these things. When you were telling about Elphinstone and all, I remembered my Bombay, Elphinstone College and my Bombay University and that architecture. Basically, since I was not from Poona, I'm not from Poona, I was really enjoying all that fantastic tour you took us for the architectural and the monuments and their development on everything. I'm really thankful to you. It was a very interesting talk. And I think everybody today has really enjoyed the talk. We really wish to see you again, wish to meet you again and listen to you. Thanks a lot and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayashree. Dr. Pushkar, a quick Google search has told me that there are 119 post offices in Pune city today. 119.
And so this is the funny thing about post offices is number 1 can be right next to number 100 because the number just gives you the sequence in which they've been built.
True. So, I mean, if you want to confuse somebody, tell them what your PIN code is. I mean, then you.
Okay.
And being from the army, we are familiar with places where no 2 digits in the PIN code are the same. So that's another interesting thing. So thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And if we had met in person, we would have presented you with a print facsimile of Rabindranath Tagore's manuscript in which he written the translation of the Jana Gana Mana. But we will send it to you, and
sure,
it will reach you shortly. Yeah.
No,
so thank you very much.
And I'll take your leave now. So, and if anybody has any questions,
yeah, thank you. Good night. I declare this meeting closed.
Is in here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It'll be great. I hope it's okay with you if I put up this thing on YouTube. Is it okay?
Yeah. Not a problem.
And a copy of your presentation would be great if you can share it. Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, Bharat, for putting it on YouTube. Really, we would also like to repeat it.
Yeah, we will do
really.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.